There are thousands of UFO sightings on record. Lights in the sky, strange shapes, missing time. Stories that fade into rumor almost as quickly as they appeared. But every once in a while, a case surfaces that feels different. Not because someone claimed to see something impossible, but because afterward, they felt physical effects. And not just headaches or anxiety. We're talking burns, blisters, hair falling out, hospitalizations, and then things got even stranger. Because according to the witnesses, it wasn't just some object drifting through the Texas sky. It was surrounded by military helicopters, and that detail changed everything. Because now the question wasn't simply, did they see a UFO? The question became, what was the military escorting through the East Texas skies in December of 1980? Tonight we're going to dive into one of the most disturbing and uncomfortable UFO encounters ever reported in America, the Cash-Landrum Incident. And the deeper you go into this story, the less comfortable it feels. December 29th, 1980, East Texas. Cold enough for your breath to hang in the air, but otherwise completely ordinary. Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Vicki's 7-year-old grandson Colby were driving home after dinner near Cleveland, Texas. They were traveling down Farm to Market Road 1485, a quiet stretch cutting through the piney woods. And if you've ever driven roads like that at night, you know the feeling. No traffic, no street lights, just darkness and trees. The kind of road where headlights feel like they're carving a tunnel through nothingness. At first they noticed what looked like a bright light ahead in the distance. Not unusual at first. Maybe a tower light, maybe an approaching vehicle. But the closer they got, the stranger it became. Because this light wasn't moving normally. It was hovering. Now this is where the story suddenly stops sounding like a distant light in the sky and starts sounding like something much more physical. The witnesses described the object as diamond-shaped, huge, roughly the size of a water tower. And beneath it, flames were blasting downward like some kind of rocket exhaust. Not smooth, not controlled. More like the thing was struggling to stay airborne. Betty eventually pulled the car over, and almost immediately, the heat became unbearable. Not warm, not uncomfortable. Dangerous. According to their testimony, the dashboard became hot enough to touch cautiously. The inside of the car began filling with intense radiant heat. And then Betty did something that, honestly, most people probably would have done. She got out to look at it. The moment she stepped outside, she claimed the heat slammed into her body. Her skin began burning. The air smelled metallic, sulfuric, like electrical fire mixed with chemicals. Meanwhile, the craft hovered directly above the road, wobbling slightly. And that detail has always fascinated investigators because the witnesses didn't describe graceful movement. They described instability. Like whatever this thing was, it was in trouble. Then Colby started screaming. He thought it was going to explode. And for a moment, honestly, it sounds like that may have been exactly what they feared. And then comes the detail that pushed this case into legend. Because as the object finally began rising higher into the night sky, they heard helicopters. A lot of them. Not one, not two. The witnesses claimed there were as many as 23 military helicopters surrounding the object. That number is difficult to ignore. These weren't described as random civilian aircraft either. The women specifically compared them to CH-47 Chinook helicopters, those massive twin-rotor military transports. And according to their account, the helicopters appeared to be escorting the craft, not chasing it, not attacking it, escorting it. That distinction matters because, if true, it suggests familiarity and coordination, possibly even control. And this is the exact point where people divide into two camps. One side saying there's no way dozens of helicopters could operate without records, while the other side asked, then why would three people independently invent something that specific? And honestly, that's the uncomfortable center of this entire case. Because if the helicopter story is true, then somebody knew what that object was. Or, at the very least, they knew it was there. Within hours of the encounter, Betty became violently ill. And this is where the case takes a turn that even many UFO skeptics admit is deeply unusual. She experienced nausea, vomiting, weakness, painful burns, blistering across her skin, and within days, her hair reportedly began falling out in clumps. Now, naturally, over the years, critics have questioned whether radiation exposure could fully explain the symptoms exactly as described, and that debate still exists. But what can't be debated is this. Betty Cash was hospitalized repeatedly. Medical documentation confirmed severe physical distress. Meanwhile, Vicky and Colby Landrum also reported symptoms, though much milder, such as headache, skin irritation, and eye pain. And when you look at the witness positioning inside the car, believers argue the severity differences actually make sense. Betty was closest to the exposure. She exited the vehicle. She stood directly beneath the object. If something hazardous was radiating downward, she would have absorbed the worst of it. And according to her testimony, she never fully recovered. Now here's something important that often gets exaggerated online. There's no verified evidence the witnesses were secretly taken aboard military aircraft or debriefed by shadowy officials. That part appears to have grown out of later retellings. What did happen is arguably more believable, and maybe more frustrating. They started demanding answers. Betty and Vicky contacted military installations across Texas asking about helicopter activity that night. One of the bases reportedly contacted was Bergstrom Air Force Base. They wanted flight logs, maintenance records, anything confirming what they saw. And according to the accounts tied to the case, the response was always essentially the same. No records, no acknowledgement, no explanation. And whether you believe them or not, you can understand why that would deepen the mystery. Because if 23 helicopters were really in the air, somebody should have known. In 1982, the case escalated dramatically. Cash and Landrum filed a $20 million lawsuit against the United States government. And this is critical. They were not trying to prove aliens existed. Legally, that wouldn't matter. Their case depended on proving military involvement. Because if U.S. helicopters were escorting the object, then the government might bear responsibility for the injuries that followed. The lawsuit attempted to obtain radar data, maintenance logs, pilot records, anything tying federal agencies to the incident. But in 1986, the court dismissed the case, not because the judge proved the witnesses lied, and not because the object was identified. The dismissal came down to lack of evidence directly linking the helicopters to the federal government. Legally speaking, the court essentially said, we can't prove who owned the aircraft. And that ruling created one of the strangest unresolved outcomes in UFO history. The witnesses lost the case, but the mystery survived intact. And this is where the case still lives today, right in the space between skepticism and possibility. Skeptics argue the helicopter numbers are exaggerated, that no operation involving that many aircraft could vanish completely. Some also question whether the medical symptoms truly align with radiation exposure as popularly described. But believers point to something equally difficult to dismiss: consistency. Over decades, the core story barely changed. The witnesses never backed away from what they claimed to see. And honestly, that's part of what makes the Cash-Landrum case endure. Not because it proves extraterrestrials, but because it refuses to settle comfortably into any explanation whatsoever. More than 4 decades later, the Cash-Landrum Incident remains one of the most unsettling UFO encounters ever reported in the United States. Because unlike many sightings, this one allegedly left evidence on human bodies. Burns, hospitalizations, lifelong suffering, and still no official explanation. No confirmed military operation, no identified aircraft, no recovered technology. Just 3 witnesses driving through East Texas on a cold December night, and a story that somehow became bigger the more people tried to explain it away. Maybe it was experimental military technology. Maybe it was a catastrophic accident covered up before anyone understood the consequences. Or maybe it was something nobody was prepared to identify. Whatever hovered above those trees in 1980, it left behind one question that still has never been answered. What kind of aircraft can injure people without ever officially existing? You know, there are a lot of UFO stories that fade once you start pulling on the threads. Witnesses change their accounts. Evidence disappears. The mystery shrinks the closer you take a look at it. But the Cash-Landrum incident almost does the opposite. Because even if you remove the extraterrestrial angle entirely, the story is still very disturbing. 3 people saw something so powerful that they believed it was being escorted by military helicopters. And afterward, at least one of them became seriously ill. Now, whether that points to experimental technology, a classified military operation, misidentification, or something even stranger, depends on where you land after looking at the evidence. But I think the reason this case has survived so long is that it falls into that uncomfortable gray area where no explanation fully satisfies the facts. And honestly, those are always the cases that seem to stay with people, not the ones with the clearest answers, the ones where every explanation creates new questions. Because if the witnesses were mistaken, what caused the illnesses? And if the helicopters weren't there, why were they described so specifically? And if this truly involves some kind of secret technology, how many incidents like this have never become public at all? The deeper you go into stories like Cash-Landrum, the more you realize something important. Sometimes the most unsettling mysteries aren't the ones involving aliens. They're the ones that suggest that somebody here on Earth may already know far more than they're willing to admit or disclose. And maybe that's the part of this story that still feels most unnerving.